Okay, welcome back. I think this should be part 17? This is part 17.
Yes.
Welcome back to our teaching on the spirit of man. And we're going to move on now to the New Testament and the Greek word for life of all things. That is, life of physical animals and plants, all living matter. It's the Greek word zoe, and it is spelled Z-O-E, and Strong's number 2222. It corresponds to the Hebrew 2416. Now, I'm going to move to the book of Matthew, chapter 7, verse 14. It says, "For the gate is small and the way is narrow that leads to life, and there are few who find it." And the word life there is Zoe. Now, let's think about that for a moment. Now, there's a lot of references. A lot. I'm just giving us a smattering so that we will understand the usage of the word. So, narrow is the gate that leads to life. Wide is the gate that leads to destruction. Now, this word life means life of the flesh. Same word that is used for a living rose rather than a artificial rose. The artificial rose might be beautiful, but it does not have Zoe. It is not alive. I've talked about this before, but they've done some fascinating experiments. I mean, you can see them. You can go on YouTube and look at them, where they've taken living things and put them in a light chamber. And it's a chamber that is so perfectly black, dark inside, that the teeniest photon of light can be detected by photon detectors inside the machine. A photon is one particle of light. You see light reflecting off my hand by billions and billions of particles called photons reflecting from these light bulbs hitting my hand. That's why you can see my hand. You're actually seeing the photons. Picture little basketballs of light bouncing off my hand. That's why you can see my hand. These machines can see one of those photons, one of the smallest particles of existence. It can see one of them. It's that sensitive. So when they take anything that's living, they just go out in the shrubbery outside the office of the science lab, and they pluck off a fresh leaf. And they go inside, and they toss it into the little box, and they close the door, they lock it, and it vacuum seals to where not even one photon of light can go inside. And they go back to their computer, and they turn it on, and they bring it into the magnification they want. And guess what? It looks like a light is on inside the box. That whole leaf is glowing with light. And they go, wow, look at that beautiful green light. So they with their camera, it's also a microscope, they zoom way down and they see the very cells of the leaf are glowing. The cells are. They're glowing. It's amazing. But if you take that leaf out and you microwave it, then put it back in the chamber cooked, the light's gone. The light is gone. They've proven that if you take fresh vegetables and without cooking them, you eat them raw, the light from those vegetables join your cells and produce more light in your flesh. Remember when they told the Babylonians told the 3 Hebrew children that they're going to eat at the king's table so that they can eat the best, and then they're going to be examined physically to see if they're healthy, to see if they're going to be spared death. And Daniel said, no, let me feed them. Let me feed them and then examine them for 1 year. And guess what he fed them? Fresh fruit and vegetables every day. By the time they were brought into the king, they looked magnificent. They were healthy and alive, and their skin shone, and they looked really good. And he goes, oh, wow, what happened? Well, they weren't eating nothing but cooked everything, highly cooked everything. The spirit of life, or Zoe, becomes part of your body if you take it in. But if all you eat is dead things, you'll start looking like Nebuchadnezzar, barely alive. So what he's saying here is this, look. He's saying the gate's small and the way narrow that leads to life, that leads to Zoe. And few there are that find it. In the spirit, this is talking about in the spirit, the wide gate and the narrow gate is talking about righteousness. So how does that correspond to the spirit of life in the flesh? Well, 2 things. One is if you follow righteousness, you're going to be healthier in your flesh. What do I mean by that? Well, it's easy. It's obvious. Historically, during the plagues of Europe, they thought that the Jews were practicing witchcraft because they weren't getting sick like everybody else from the plagues. And the Jews kept saying, no, we're not practicing witchcraft. We're Jews. We're not practicing witchcraft. You must be. You're not getting sick like everybody else and dying like everyone else of the plague. And the Jews said, no, we're just practicing the health laws. The health laws. Because they were practicing the health laws and not partaking of pork, and they were not living with rats, they were burying their garbage, and they were burying their latrines. Instead of throwing it in the streets like the Europeans, like the foolish Europeans, they were burying all of their waste. So the rats didn't come around their houses because there was nothing there. The pigs didn't come around them because there was nothing there. So that the disease did not come to them because they were acting healthy. They were following righteousness. So in the spirit of life in their flesh, they lived. While the Europeans died because they practiced death that kills life in the flesh. Isn't that amazing? So that's in the natural, but here it is in the spiritual. If you live according to the lusts of the flesh, you actually begin killing the flesh. Paul talks about homosexuals that practice their homosexuality will receive within themselves the just recompense of their error. Now, the just recompense is death. Because in the Old Testament, they were stoned. In the New Testament, they weren't stoned. They weren't allowed to do that anymore by the Romans, because so many of the Romans were homosexuals and the Greeks. They weren't allowed to do that. But Paul said, look, even so, just because they legalized it, don't think that it's okay. You still will receive in yourselves, within yourselves, the just recompense of that error. And it's true. People who practice that spread disease. AIDS, they could say, well, AIDS was man-made. Who spread it? Homosexuals. Why? Because their actions spread it. It also spreads and created new strains of hepatitis. So that little grade school kids have to get these horrible shots that a certain percentage of the kids will be wounded or killed from. And it's because of the homosexuals' practices that spread hepatitis in all the schools. Most of the hemophiliacs in America have AIDS or have died of AIDS because the homosexuals spread AIDS in the blood supply. I'll never forget, it was here in Seattle, in the newspaper here in Seattle, where they were encouraging each other to go give blood so that more straights will get AIDS, and then they'll spend more money on AIDS research. They purposely infected the blood supply. And nowadays, if you go get a you're in danger of getting the latest garbage that is in almost all the vaccine now. Or all the vaccine, excuse me, in all of the blood supply now. You'll need to help me with that one. Anyways. So the Spirit of life, if you practice unrighteousness, you will take the Spirit of life from your own flesh. And it's a wide, wide, wide door because it just yields to the flesh and you're going to go through that door. And you're going to kill yourself in the flesh. And the Spirit of life will leave you and your flesh will go back to the dust. People wonder, why did God destroy the city of Pompeii? Why was it destroyed by a volcano? Well, for the same reason Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. The same exact reason. It was the homosexual and sex capital of the Roman Empire. It was the Las Vegas or San Francisco vacation resort. Some of those buildings they've uncovered are covered in carvings that are pornographic, and so are the statues they've uncovered. And that's why it was destroyed. The same reason Sodom and Gomorrah were. So practice unrighteousness, practice sin, and it will take Zoe from your flesh. And you'll fall into disease, into early death. That's what it's saying. Isn't that amazing? Okay. Luke chapter 12, verse 15. Let's go there real quick. Luke chapter 12, verse 15. And it says this. Speaking of Christ, it says, "Then he said to them, beware, and be on your guard against every form of greed, for not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions." In other words, your life, the life in your flesh, does not possess or consist of your possessions. It really consists of righteousness, following after God, doing what's right. But possessions, is possessions going to keep the Spirit of life in your flesh or resurrect your flesh on the other side? No. Righteousness will, though. Righteousness will, though. There's much more, but we're almost out of time. Let me do one more. Luke chapter 16, since we're here in Luke, verse 25. But Abraham said, "Child, remember that during your life you received your good things, and likewise Lazarus bad things. But now he is being comforted here, and you're in agony." So he's bringing home the point in the story of the rich man and Lazarus. You received good things during life, and Lazarus received bad things. And yet here we are on the other side. Lazarus built up righteousness in his life, and so he was alive with Abraham, whereas the rich man was in torments, and he was separated from God, and so in death, waiting for the judgment. Okay, we will continue here next week. Lord bless you in your study. And again, those of you watching this, you are more than welcome to give me a note, send me a note, say hi, introduce yourself. I'd love to hear from you. Lord bless you. Bye-bye.